Welcome back. Super happy to have Tony joining the show. Tony, thank you so much for taking the time.
Great to be here.
We just discussed coffee or tea guy. Why did you end up with tea and not coffee?
Uh, for me, nighttime is tea time, but I will drink coffee all day.
Really? Okay.
Yeah,
Tell me about a typical day in your life, and then maybe we can introduce Manolin in that story as well, because you're quite busy nowadays.
sure. Yeah, typical day for me. I think it varies quite a bit. Right now, a lot of early mornings. I like to get up about 5 in the morning so I can talk to our team in Bergen. And that's when my day gets started, and then spend the day kind of on calls, building software, having meetings. Yeah, it kind of varies. And then, towards the afternoon, we typically catch up with the team here in Denver, and while everybody in Norway is asleep. But long days, but it's been
But
fun.
but waking up 5 in the morning, was it the same while you were studying at MIT, or is it something you have to do now since you is a founder in a startup?
I don't know if it's being a founder, if it's growing up a little bit. At MIT, it's actually the culture is very different. It's mostly late nights and very late mornings. They actually have a rule where classes don't start before 9, so that's the first class. And then most people by their junior and senior years start to figure out that I can find ways to make my schedule work so I don't have a class until 10 or 11. So it's actually an opposite. I guess when you're in school, it's late nights and staying up late. And now I'm kind of a early morning person. So
But
it's been a
okay,
switch.
so from MIT to startups, was this like a normal trajectory growing up, or do you think there's something in your upbringing that leaned you towards entrepreneurship, MIT and stuff, or is it coincidence and just life happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I have a slightly unique path. It wasn't typical to go to an Ivy League or MIT from my high school. I grew up in the South in America, and prior to the last couple of years, my high school actually didn't send anyone to MIT for I think it was almost like 20 years. So it wasn't necessarily a normal path, but entrepreneurship for me, it really clicked. It's definitely an ingrained part of school. And, when you go to MIT, you see all the students, brilliant people who have built great companies. And, it's very inspiring. But, I didn't get any of that growing up. I grew up in a town where our primary industry is tobacco. We're known for having, one of the larger tobacco companies based. So that was my upbringing. But I mean, I think I had a very entrepreneurship type of attitude. I always like to build things. I always like to do things by myself. Back in high school and middle school, we had a lawn mowing business. Myself and a neighbor, hustled around on. So growing a business and doing my own thing was something I always had. But it was really school at MIT that you kind of got really inspired and saw what was possible. People building Dropbox or HubSpot, and a lot of those great companies. And to hear that, they were just a couple of years older than me at the time, it was pretty eye-opening.
So, being in Boston, I actually went and visited MIT, and of course, you get inspired just by being around the place. Do you think it's actually important in your life that you've been at MIT, or do you feel like it's just education? Or do you feel like that inspiration and seeing so many people working so hard and also having this like influence from people visiting and stuff actually matters when you're now building and scaling?
No, I think it was super, super helpful. Very inspiring to be around people that, have done it. I think it makes it, when you're in that environment, it just makes it seem a little bit closer. It makes it seem feasible. I think, I'd liken it to, a lot of athletes when, they get inspired when, a professional athlete comes and trains with them and they see how hard they work. They see what it really takes to kind of, to make it. And to be honest, it's similar to our journey to Norway. When we came and visited Bergen, we really got a huge eye opening into what the aquaculture ecosystem looked like, as well as what kind of companies were actually being built, and it gave us the confidence that we thought we could make an impact and also achieve it. So I think being in person and really seeing it firsthand makes a really big impact.
Yeah, and just to add on that, can you also just tell us about like a typical guest that would visit MIT and share their stories? Because there have been some very big people at your campus. I think every time we discuss unicorns, you say that, okay, I remember that guy at MIT, either it's Patrick or someone from Airbnb or whatever, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was one of the most influential classes I had was called the Founder's Journey. It was a whole class. It was twice a week, and the goal was for them to bring in alumni to talk about their actual journeys. And I was at MIT kind of towards 2010 or so. And that class, brought in some real big all-stars. Brad Feld came in, Drew Houston from Dropbox came in, Patrick Collison from Stripe. At the time, I mean, they weren't necessarily huge companies, but their stories, they talked about, where they ate, what classes they went to, their struggles doing problem sets as homework. And then, from there, you just saw their kind of growth, right? Like they're now stories that everybody kind of looks at. But at the time, they just came in, talked to us, asked, it was just kind of a sit down open discussion. And, that opened a lot of doors, but also kind of a lot of what the opportunity looked like. When you hear Drew say, yeah, we just didn't want, I built this thing on a bus. And then we decided to give equity to a homeowner because we needed a place to actually live. So we gave away equity. Apparently that person became the best investor that they ever had as far as return. They gave away, a room to a couple college kids for a few months and came out with more than all the Silicon Valley VCs.
It's crazy. Can you now go? I think you're working for the government when the idea comes up about working with ocean and software, or how did that idea evolve in your head? And let's introduce the idea properly as well.
Sure. I mean, one of the big passions and one of the big things that I learned was just the potential of software and data when I was in school, the impact that it can make on the world. I mean, I think when you look at it, it's changed a lot about this world, and it will continue to make that impact. When I graduated, I wanted to see what that potential looked like. And I thought a very great place to learn was in government. How can technology and data really help scale what governments do? So that's what I went to go and pursue when I moved to DC. Was working with a government consulting firm, building data systems, and stumbling across kind of the ocean space was a little bit random. I was passionate about food systems. My co-founder and I, we were just random roommates, and discovered oyster farms on the Bay Coast. So this was in the Chesapeake Bay. And, through those oyster farmers, they really taught us about, what they were doing, growing protein, changing the food systems, growing these oysters, cleaning up the water. And, we thought it was the coolest thing, but we recognized that, it was an industry that didn't have much tech. It didn't have much data. So it started as a hobby. We would just go down there on the weekends, visit, one of the farmers said, hey, we have a guest house. You can just stay here. John and I, said that was great. We come down on the weekend and just write some code. So that's really how it got started and how that pivot switched from working with the government into working with the oceans.
How would you sort of describe the food system? Because maybe it's a different way of viewing it as an American compared to a Norwegian, or how would you describe the food system and how complex it is? Because producing something in big scale always have some trade-offs, right? So how can you get an introduction into the food system, maybe since you worked so close with it?
Absolutely. I mean, so one of the work I did some projects at the Food and Drug Administration when I was here with the government, and through that I kind of got a glimpse into how the food system worked. But I also had kind of an outside passion, just liking food, and I was curious about the impacts of our food systems. Coming out of college, I was looking into things like aquaponics, vertical greenhouses, all of these different new things that were coming up at the time. John and I actually built a aquaponics setup in our apartment. We had a couple fish in a fish tank, and we started growing some herbs and was cycling that water. So trying to just explore with it, looking at these different components. But I think what you mentioned there, one of the things that's really hard to grasp is scale. So you can talk to the oyster farmers and see what that scale looks like. And you look at the numbers when it comes to salmon farming and shrimp farming and what total consumption looks like. it's such a big problem. And, what I've come to learn, and, the part that I think is exciting is that there's just so many challenges when it comes to food. You can talk about producing food that's good for the environment. You can talk about it at scale when you talk about the entire world. There's just so much going on and so many challenges. It's really a core piece of, I think, what our future looks like. We got to find a way to feed all these people, and we got to find a way that does it in balance with the ocean or with the world and the environment. So that, I think, is what really got us into this food system. But yeah, the food system in general, there's so many trade-offs. There's not one single solution in any of these problems.
Got you. So when you decided to act on this idea, if you were to submit to YC Combinator or something, what's the simplest way of putting the idea? Because I guess at the start it was basically maybe just 2-3 sentences on a vision plate, and then that's the vision, and then go build it, right? So how would you explain the concept in the simplest terms possible?
Simplest terms possible. I think the simplest terms possible is we use the tagline "Healthy Farms for Healthy Seas," and that, I think, encompasses a lot of what we're trying to accomplish. We think that when it comes to the oceans, the healthy farms will contribute to creating a healthier ocean. And if you want to talk VCs and the markets and whatnot, the oceans is an untapped one. It's an unregulated space. The amount of activity that goes on, I think the ocean represents some of the largest challenges that we have in the world. It also represents potentially a solution to a lot of those challenges. So the opportunity, we think, is definitely there. But what it comes down to is helping farmers have the healthiest farms that they can. We see that as the biggest and most important asset when it comes to growing this industry and the challenges ahead.
Maybe you also just can explain the sort of the balance, or maybe the development between aquaculture and wild fisheries, so people also get that point, right? Because if you're going to produce more food in scale, it's not going to come from wild fisheries. You have to sort of use aquaculture as a tool, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges and questions that we hear, particularly here in the States. In the US, we don't know much about aquaculture. It's not a big industry. It's not viewed as, a big system. And to be honest, it's viewed pretty negatively when you bring it up. But going back to what we talked about with, food systems and the scale and the problems ahead, when it comes to aquaculture, I think in wild fisheries, I think it's really interesting when you look at the facts that 1 in 7 people in the world depend on seafood as their primary source of protein. I think you can shoot holes in any sort of way that we produce food. On land, in the water, there's positives and negatives to every single solution. But aquaculture, I think, has a lot of potential. It's not to say the industry hasn't made mistakes in the past, but the potential is always been there. I don't think we can continue fishing, wild fisheries are sustainable long term. I just don't think those numbers, match up. I mean, there's no way we can keep fishing the oceans, and we got to figure out how to do it in a better way. And everything can't be on land, so we got to figure out what's the right way that we want to accomplish it in the oceans.
Agree.
But yeah, so I think aquaculture has to fit in.
So then take us, why did you go to Norway and Bergen? Is it like that? It has to be a great story because you work at the government. You decide to build a tech startup using tech in ocean farms and fish farmers. So why Bergen? Why did you get on the plane?
No, so, I think it goes back to a lot of the stories that we've heard from our oyster friends. A lot of those guys, it at a simple level, right? They need inventory software. They need to report properly. They want to make sure if disease breaks out, they can track it down. But what they got really interested in, one of their biggest challenges that they asked us was, could you help us reduce our mortality? We lose half of these oysters every year and we don't know why. And what that really, when we start digging into that problem, what we discovered was that the challenges and the reasons for why you would lose half of a farm can come from anywhere. It can come from, runoff downstream. It can come from a storm. It can come from an algae bloom. It can come from the neighboring farm or, a boat coming by. All of these factors could contribute to it. So in order to solve the problem, you really had to harness a large amount of data if you wanted to try to predict all of these issues to help them really, lose less than half of their farm every year. So that's number one. What we identified was we needed to find a lot of data if we really wanted to solve these types of challenges. And what we recognized and how we ended up in Norway was that when you look at the salmon market, the amount of data that has been generated in this space is enormous. The farms have had software for 20 years, cameras, sensors, everything is decked out. There's so much data. Even, the Norwegian government collects and publicizes a ton of data. There was no industry, no market in aquaculture that has the scale of data that Norway does. So we quickly recognized that, if we wanted to really succeed in helping farmers raise, have the healthiest farms, we needed to start with the place with the most data. So we got on a plane, went to Bergen for a couple of weeks, did a quick visit and basically fell in love with the industry, the city, everything.
So at that point, when you go to Norway, are you convinced to building this software, or is it just a tour to see and if it's right for us to establish us in Norway and build? Or what is the mindset when you went to Bergen the first time?
Yeah, it was really just exploration at that point. It goes back to when you talked about, influences and where's the inspiration comes from. Going to Bergen was, we were told this was the center of aquaculture, right? This is the Silicon Valley of aquaculture. You won't find the resources anywhere else. And we had to see it for ourselves. And, one of the big themes that, I've reflected on is when you think about Silicon Valley and startups, why does everyone flock there? It's where all the ideas are. You can talk to somebody, you can go to a coffee shop, a bar, and you never know. You may end up with a connection to an investor. It may be kind of that groundbreaking thing that happens for a company. And you just can't find those opportunities anywhere else. When it comes to our industry in aquaculture, Bergen represented that. You go to the bars, everybody will talk about salmon. They'll talk about salmon prices. They'll talk about what work they're doing. You can find those opportunities in Bergen unlike any place in the world. And we saw that firsthand, driving up and down the East Coast looking for ocean farmers, oyster farmers. We're driving miles and hours, every time just to get to the next farm, where you have a city like Bergen, where you have researchers, government, everybody is involved with it in one way or another. And, that really is what inspired us. This was the place that we could learn faster than anywhere else.
Got you. So you mentioned the touring up and down. How important is it to actually visit and not just read about it sitting in Bergen and going to bars? Because, we know this, Tony, but I don't think people hearing this know how the people are, the pioneers, because they like to be where the action happens and not in the cities talking about it.
Yeah. No, it's I make a lot of comparisons to the work that we did, visiting oyster farms, because I liken it very similarly to the industry in Norway. It's just a couple decades behind in a sense, but the types of people that we met were very similar. And like you said, one of the things that John and I really wanted to accomplish in Norway was to visit up and down the coast. We've come to learn that Norway is very, very different. Northern Norway, Western Norway, Eastern Norway, they all got different cultures and different types of people. And there's a lot to be learned from a lot of it. But going back to, why is it so important? The industry pioneers, I think you don't find an industry. I don't know if there's many industries like this, because salmon farming, the guys who started it, the guys who threw a net pen off a dock, I don't even know, 5 meter by 5 meter net 30, 40 years ago, and just threw some salmon in and saw if they could keep them alive, are the ones running these companies now. And that growth and trajectory is something I don't know if you've seen anywhere else. And I think it's crazy that, the market and the industry is so advanced now, but it really just started with the same guys who, I could have been one of those people at some point. I've definitely caught fish on my fishing rod, put them in a tank and try to keep them at home for as long as possible. Right. It's that similar feeling. And I got the same sense with the oyster guys. Like, I think one of the interesting things you hear is if you go to an oyster farmer, the oyster industry, has two sides. There's the kind of high end side that is like the wine bar. You got your dozen oysters, and you sip your wine, and it's $3 per oyster. Or you can go to the farm and sit down with the farmer, sit on the dock, and crack open oysters, have a beer, sit by the actual grill. And it's the two different sides, same food, but it's two different sides. And you kind of see that with the salmon markets too, and the guys who are part of it.
Definitely. So while you're meeting these pioneers in the industry, how do you see your product and the product you're building in Manolin helping them? Because I think I don't know if it's like pivoting a lot of times during your years, but you have to sort of always reflect, am I building the right product for these guys that are so good, right? So can you tell us a bit about those like processes? Because I guess you get new input all the time.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think it's something it's a challenge for any startup, right? Finding product market fit, finding what your customers want. I mean, from our side, right, we didn't come from a farming background. We came from a tech background. And because of that, we've had to stay very diligent about the learning and the feedback that we get, helping them. I mean, we're never going to be better farmers. We can never, we're never going to be able to replace that experience and that work. But what we can do is really focus on the efficiencies and, where can we save time for people? What has changed in the industry, in my opinion, is, there's more critics, there's more people that want to see what's going on, and managing this data, managing this information is becoming a bigger and bigger challenge. And it's, I think, becoming the responsibilities of the companies to be able to figure that out. So that's where I think tech can really help. But the experience and the decision making, you can't replace that. I mean, the best that we can try to do is to give farmers time back in their actual day, because what we hear is they want to spend it on the farm. And that's what we want to make happen, is get out of the office, get back out to the farm as easy as possible. That's been the kind of mission and the line of thinking that we have been following when we come with iterations.
Can you explain how you would like the farmers to use your software and tool? So maybe it's easier for people listening to understand how you want the farmers to use Manolin software.
Yeah, and I guess we haven't necessarily given a full pitch of the product, but I mean, what we're doing is building tools and data insights to help farmers make better decisions or more informed decisions, and really to help them save time and to be out on the farm more. And when you're talking about how we do that, and the areas, one of the things that I think is changing in the industry is this interest over fish health. And that has been our focus. The farmers, that is their most important asset, is having great health, and managing it is becoming more and more challenging. So the ways that we help is, for one, we help manage data. So we bring in all of a farm's data from their inventory systems, from their lab reports, from their neighboring areas, and bring it into one place so they can see it in one specific area. The number two thing that we do is we help them track, metrics. One of the key things you hear from any farmer is they can tell you specifically exactly what happened last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. They know their seasons very, very well. But what we have learned is, as these organizations have grown, tracking this information over time and being able to measure it becomes harder. It becomes, I guess, like a fishing story. The fish always seems bigger every time you kind of talk about it. So having numbers to back up those decisions is really important. And then the last piece that we really want to work on is the forecasting side. So forecasting will never change, the way a farmer makes a decision. But it can really augment a lot of the kind of thinking. What are the risks coming? Am I at risk of a disease because of certain things? I believe that the data can tell you a lot that can help with that decision-making process.
Let's give an example, even if it's sea lice or whatever, because just people listening. So you have different farmers operating maybe close to each other. And if something breaks out, a bacteria or sea lice, your data can actually help people be aware of that quicker, right?
Absolutely. That's what our goal and mission is. I think if we want to dive into one of those specific examples, when it comes to a disease such as PD, farmers have the industry has grown. There's a lot of choices and a lot of ways to try to combat a disease or an illness. You can have a different egg. You can have a vaccine. You can change up, your cleaning process. There's so many of these factors. When it works, it's hard to know what's the actual reason that it works. And when it doesn't work, it's hard to know why that was the case. So that's where I think software and data can do a lot to help slice and dice this, to make better judgment calls. So, can we see something in the data that seems like a trend? Can we measure that over time and really get to a confirmation if that is the actual case and whether that specific reason was why something worked or didn't work? When it comes to a disease like PD, that's a very specific example.
And just to sort of like emphasize that, because what makes this so hard is that we're talking about biology to a large degree.
Yeah.
And it's so hard. I mean, Silicon Valley, I've talked about this like software meets biology for, I don't know, 5-10 years, but
yeah,
it's very hard to crack. Can you just like explain how hard it is to forecast and explain biology in data? I know it's coming more and more, but like that's not an easy problem to work on.
It's absolutely. I think it's the way we think about it is, you're never going to know it all. And in the oceans in particular, that's a very unknown thing when it comes to what we as humans understand from a science point of view, right? We always hear stories on space versus the oceans. We don't know anything of what's going on. So it's a constant and ongoing struggle. And, I think the best we can do is try to generate more information and continue chasing a lot of these insights. But yeah, when it comes to the biological aspects of farming, you can't figure it out. There's always going to be unknowns. Something's always going to come up. But I think the science in us wants to explore it.
Because also it's also always evolving, right? So it's not like if you figure out biology, you're done. You're just like, okay, now it's day 1 and day 2 will be different.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a ton of random occurrences, right? And, one of the facts that I think is so interesting is when it comes to salmon farming, right? People will compare it to cattle, to chickens, to pigs and poultry. But when you think about the amount of generations that have occurred, salmon farming is, what do we have? Maybe 10, 20 at most generations of fish that have ever been raised and kind of bred. When you compare that to the other species that we farm, that's thousands of generations. We've done it for so long. There's been a lot of times to kind of figure it out and, see what the different options are. But when it comes to fish, we're still so early in that process. It hasn't even developed yet.
Definitely. So let's change topic a bit. I mean, in Norway, we have this like big wave of entrepreneurship and startups. I know you notice it because you have been pitching as well in Norway. Of course, I think you won every pitch you entered.
I don't know about that.
Can you? Yeah. Can we compare startups the way I know you're not looking so much at Norwegian startups, but when you live in Bergen, when you're in Norway, you probably reflect and talk about the differences. I have some ideas on the differences, but can we try to paint a picture of how you have viewed the Norwegian startup landscape compared to the country you're from and the American way of scaling a startup?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off by saying, American startups also differ quite a bit. Even regionally. I mean, I'll be honest, I've never actually worked in Silicon Valley. I've worked for startups in the past, but I've never actually been in that ecosystem. But it does differ quite a bit, and I think we've seen a lot of growth from the Norway side. I think there's definitely differences in the culture of both countries, and the way that we kind of operate. Work-life balance is a little bit different for sure. But I mean, I think the ways to kind of break it down are, when you look at the differences, it's really about, what are the problems people are facing, what stage of the growth. Not every market, I think, is going to have, the VC market. You can't all be Silicon Valley. So it is very different. And I mean, for us, we've seen differences in Denver, where I'm currently based, versus when we talk to, VCs in Silicon Valley, for example. But I think every single geography has got its own unique thing. And I see Norway, Bergen in particular, developing its own.
But so when you participate in those pitching competition in Norway, I know maybe that was very early on, the DNB stuff and the accelerator, etc. Do you like a lot of the cases, or do you feel some of the cases are not the right fit for VC? Because I remember we were discussing on the phone that not every case is a VC case, and that some businesses should just be grown 10% each year and be happy with that, while some company needs that 10x. Maybe we can break that concept a bit down, because I don't feel like that's common knowledge in Norway, but in US it's getting pretty clear, the idea that VC isn't always the best option.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a founder perspective, when you talk to VCs, they're pretty clear about what they want, right? As far as, is their goal to get you to the next round? Do they measure their company based on how many series can move on to Series A, how many move on to Series B? What are the KPIs they, focus in on? And as a founder, you make the decision on whether that is right for your business or not, and whether you want to go after that kind of pathway. And whether those resources, can benefit you. I think it's tough though, because the one thing that when you think about it, some of the companies that have become huge successes, they don't sound like it, they sound like 10% businesses at the beginning, anyways. Selling books over the internet never seemed like a huge business at the time, right? So it's hard to figure out. I think it really comes down to what the founding team and what the founders want to accomplish with it. If their goal is, maybe they want to build a 10x company, but that starts by building 10%, for the first few years. It really comes down to what the founding team wants and what's right for the company. But yeah, I think people are starting to recognize. I think one of the interesting things is, the amount of resources that's out there. You don't necessarily have to bring in money to build businesses nowadays. In stand-up websites, you can start something and test things very, very quickly. So the opportunities are becoming more and more open when it comes to the founding teams.
And also, right, a bad VC structure can destroy a company very easy, because like you said, the incentives on the board is so important, because the wrong board member actually gives Tony more work than less, right? And a good board member actually helps you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is our first company that we have founded. But you learn those lessons, I think, as you go along. You start to see the value of the people that have really been there for you. And they say don't ever take the biggest round, right? So you really got to pick the right people and the ones who are going to back you. And I think that's the case for if you're building a 10% business or a venture business, but that's the case. You want to surround yourself with the right people. That lesson probably never ends. It's always going to be true.
and I always come back to, I feel like your biggest job maybe is to hire the right people, because the people you hire is the company you build. So the first 10 people, that's the company. I mean, you can talk about the culture, values and stuff, but if you hire 3 people that doesn't suit your vision, it's never going to work anyway, probably. So has hiring been the thing you're like spending a lot of time on and are not sure about, or have you found hiring to be easier than you thought, or how has that recruiting looked on your end?
Yeah, I did quite a bit of recruiting back in my previous job, but I think the biggest difference in the work that we're doing now is, making sure you have a team you can believe in, because you're going to be in the trenches. There's going to be good days and bad days, and that team is really everything for the company. So for us, finding those right folks, it may take a little bit longer, but we want to make sure that we make the right choices when it comes to it. So it has been a lot of learning. I think it's been really exciting. It's been really fun meeting a lot of people and kind of going on this journey. But but yeah, I think when it comes down to it, we just want to find people who can get the job done, but that we can put our faith behind, and they can put our faith behind in us. Because I think it goes both ways. One of the pieces that we talk about is every hire, we definitely want to improve on certain pieces, right? If we're hiring right now, we are looking at a senior data engineer. We want to bring in a senior data engineer that is better than all of us that are currently on the team. And that's something we're very open about. We expect people to come into our teams and be better than what we can do, day one, and they have that expertise. So, finding that, I think, is different. In many organizations, you hire to replace an actual role. And I had a different perspective when I was hiring for a previous company. But in this situation, we're really looking for the right team players.
So basically, you want to average up for every hire, right?
Yeah,
But that's
absolutely.
so incredibly hard, right?
Yeah.
So how do you do it? By talking to people, or do you need references, or is it just like this complicated puzzle where you just try to get the pieces to fit in your head?
No, I mean, I think step one is being very honest about what we're good at and what we're not good at. I think, is you can be very cavalier, and, I think back in college, kind of growing up, I've had confidence in myself, right? I felt like I can learn things. I felt like I can do things by myself. And, recognizing that you may be good at that, you may be a quick learner, but there's still going to be people who can help you even faster. And that's been, I think, the step one for our team, is recognizing and being very truthful and honest about, where are the gaps. And, from there, meeting people, you don't necessarily have to, references are great, but it really, is first recognizing where the failures are, and being truthful about it. And then everything else kind of fits in from there.
I think that's a very important concept, because even though you could solve every problem, that wouldn't be productive, because, usually, I don't know what you want to spend your time doing, but usually a person should spend maybe 70% of their time doing what they're best at, right? Because if you are solving every problem, even though you can, it's not very good for the company. How's your schedule evolved during these last years? Do you feel like you're getting closer to a normal week where you feel super productive, or do you still feel that some days you're doing so much different problem sets that maybe you could have outsourced to better people in the team?
It comes and goes. I think that's the narrative of startups. Some weeks are great, some weeks are bad. Some weeks you have everything on your plate, and some weeks you focus on one specific thing. So it's just a lot of different changes. But as far as the normalcy, I think it's getting, every time that we add more people to the actual team, it takes a couple months. You figure out what works, what doesn't work, and then you start to figure out how you work well with different groups. And then every time that happens, you get more and more scheduled. For example, I know, when it comes to certain pieces of the tech, I don't need to be involved in. I don't need to be involved in the conversation. I don't need to be, I don't approve anything. I don't write any of it. And we can have that straight, team I guess split, essentially. But it takes some time, but you're constantly juggling. I think it changes every week, because everyone's growing, everyone's being able to take on more, and we're all trying to figure out which pieces fit in the best.
Agree. Can we introduce some of the investors, because you have landed some very good people from Norway and US? Maybe you can start on the Norway side, and then we can take the US investors, which maybe some are familiar with. So who are they, and how did you end up choosing them? Because I think, have you been lucky all the time? I remember talking to you in one particular round. It seemed like there was always an interest. So has it been more about choosing the right ones? Because some don't have that luxury of choosing right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think for us, we have had the ability to choose who's been the right partners for us. And we have been very fortunate in that case. And we've brought on, a great team. From the Norway side, Hatch has been a big supporter of ours, and really got us going. So we participated in their first cohort, back in 2018, in Bergen. And they've been crucial from the aquaculture standpoint. They've had a worldwide reach with the partners they've had and the experience they've had in the industry, and that for us has been really huge. From the U.S. side, Boost VC is the investors who have supported us, and Adam Draper in particular has been extremely helpful. What they bring to us is kind of a different mindset. They bring in the American VC mentality. They have helped us kind of open doors and see what is out there. And I mean, Adam in particular is extremely passionate about the actual oceans. And I think I connected with him a lot on that, and our team did. And when it comes to investors, you're building a team too, right? You want to have a team that you can go to during the bad days, during the good days, and they can be a sounding board. They can help you resolve issues. They can give you ideas. But at the end of the day, you want them to be in support of you, and we have that with our VCs.
If you take Adam as an example, which seems extremely smart and very driven, do you use those conversations to get inspired, or do you use them to solve problems? Because I think both are like good enough, right? Because if you have the person helping you, like it's also in your best interest to use that person the best way, right? Because of course you can have board members that are super smart, but it doesn't mean that you should visit them every evening. Like, I have a problem, can you help me fix it? So how do you use those people effectively?
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I think it comes back to recognizing what you need to improve on. When it comes from our side, he brings in a lot of expertise from other companies, and they aren't in the same space, but many of them have gone through the same challenges. So, a particular question I'll ask him is, have you seen the same issue happen? Have you ever seen a company deal with the same problem in other space? I think, maybe aquaculture is similar to agriculture. Maybe it's similar to healthcare. And if you've seen similar things kind of occur, the kind of trends and the truth there could be very helpful for us. The other side of it is, being a sounding board and knowing where you can go to get advice. And this isn't necessarily advice on just operational, but it could be emotional advice. Being a founder can sometimes be lonely in a sense. And you've probably heard that in many stories, and, finding the right investors and the right advisors who you can talk to about those things can be very helpful. So we have advisors, a great team of advisors along with investors, and they each serve a different purpose for us, and we've been very careful in how we've picked it to make sure it's very balanced.
Can we dive into the concept of like loneliness and stuff? Because I feel like founders are typically viewed as super people, so they are typically very smart, right? Like very driven, have a lot of grit, and of course they have it. But I mean, a lot of conversations that doesn't go on Zoom calls like this one doesn't really showcase the like emotional roller coaster, because you're basically doing something that maybe some people say it's 10% chance of succeeding. Some say with the right team is 30% chance. So can you just give people an insight into how it is to found a company and try to scale it based on your experience? Because I guess but you also know a lot of founders. So I guess you have heard other stories as well, because it's a pretty rough 5 years ahead if you decide to start a company.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the glass half full and the glass half empty point of view. I'll say, from my point of view, it's been the most exciting and kind of rewarding aspects of what I've done. I think I've learned more in the last few years than I've had at any point in my life. This is, how to deal with people, how to build a company, how to manage sales and marketing. And, you just are learning so much when you're talking about drinking from the fire hose. It really is it. But on the flip side of that, you are taking on a lot. When you have to deal with employees, I think it's different when you're managing a team and you're part of a bigger company, when they're really, this is your team. And the sacrifices you have to make, the weddings you don't get to go to. There's a lot of kind of personal sacrifice that comes in, and when things maybe aren't going as well as you hope, that at that point, you can put yourself in a tough spot. And you definitely hear that from, you hear that from a lot of founders. But I will say, even with all that, this has been the most rewarding and kind of aspect of anything I've done.
But that's so important, Tony, because if you're working super hard, but at the same time get results, it's like this amazing experience. But I think the problem comes if you're like working around the clock, and if you hit so many obstacles and you don't see any way out of it. I mean, that's the part that are not discussed, because it's like having one rough night, it's okay, but to have the same rough night for 6 months and sacrificing everything, and maybe people around you expect you to be a success, that has to be a tough thing mentally.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a big sports fan. I liken it, following the actual journeys of a lot of, athletes. It's very similar, right? Like you grind and you grind, and the chance of you succeeding, if you want an Olympic gold medal, or an NBA championship, any of these kind of accomplishments that you're measured on and expected to achieve is, chance of it's pretty low. Only one team wins every year. And, just because of that percentage doesn't mean you don't go through the actual journey. Do you not grind every day with that in mind? So it's very similar, and that's where I think you can learn a lot of lessons and make the comparisons. I mean, maybe it's more extended, right? When it comes to startups, it can be 5 years, it can be 10 years, but that's, I guess, the viewpoint you got to have.
Gotcha. So we got some Twitter questions that I just wanted to make you answer quickly. So one question that I think was pretty good was about, is this only for salmon farms? And of course, like, you can just say that it's not, but that's been the focus in Norway, at least.
Absolutely. We have the opinion that aquaculture is not going to grow without Norway, and we're talking globally, right? Software, tech, data, it's going to be applicable no matter what ocean market you want to look at, but we don't think it's going to happen without Norway being a part of it. Norway sets the example, so that has been our focus. If it doesn't work in Norway, it's going to be really hard to work anywhere else.
Let me say it like this: after visiting Brazil, if it doesn't work in Norway, I don't think you will go to Brazil and build it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the other part was a bit about general tips to startups. Have you seen anything or changed your mind about anything that you are very keen to tell founders when you talk to them? Because this is a great platform to share some insights that maybe can help people. Because I mean, a startup even can be it's the same journey if you're building tech or you're building something else. At least many of the times you face the same issues with scale, hiring, culture, etc. Is there something that you feel is so important to tell the founders that are maybe thinking about starting or have just started building?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it a lot, and we heard it from some of our, a big inspiration of mine, the founder of Pacifico Seafood out of Baja, Mexico. He told us on our first meeting was, the startup life isn't that grand. Like, make sure if you're going to do this, be committed to it. Like, is this what you're willing to dedicate 5, 10, 15 years to really work on? Like, that's the mentality you got to have going in. And I know, in the last decade or so, startups have become a very kind of grand vision, right? It's the startup lifestyle. It's very sexy from what the media portrays it at. But if you really want to solve the problems, you got to be really dedicated. And at the time, the person that we talked to, John and I were a couple months in. He had no idea whether we could be committed. We felt like we definitely were. But that's something every founder, and if you're going to jump into it, I think you got to have the right mindset. We were committed to it, but we've had to prove it, right? We've had to be in Norway for a few years, and that's when people start to really recognize that you are definitely serious. But I think that's the mindset. You got to make sure that whatever you're working on is something you're passionate about and something you can put in, a big chunk of your professional career into.
That's so important, because that basically means that if you have a great business idea that you think can make money in year 2, 3, but if you're not committed to working on it for at least 5 years, probably you should think about if you should start it, right?
Yeah.
Simple as that. So another part I wanted to just discuss briefly before we get to the end here is the concept of remote working. I mean, remote has always been talked about a lot, especially in the US, that is possible. You have like the Steve case, the rise of the rest, because this is also just to introduce the concept of remote. It's not just only about freedom. It's a big like cost structure or a cost component, because to hire an engineer in Silicon Valley, maybe the salary is 10x. And if you're a startup, why would you be based in Silicon Valley? And also, it's a recruiting issue, because if you are competing with Stripe on hiring an engineer, of course, normally Stripe would beat you, right? But if you adjust the playing field, maybe there's a lot of arbitrage and a lot of opportunities. So, can you also talk a bit about the concept of remote in your head, but also how has COVID either confirmed your thoughts or like disproved your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we've always been remote to a certain degree. I've always bounced back and forth with the States and Norway. We've always had, employees here and employees in Bergen. So our team's been split. So we've been naturally remote even before COVID to a certain degree. But I think probably every single organization has felt it even harder, and we're no different. We thought we were pretty good at working remotely, but we've had to improve our processes, whether it's how we track things, what we write down, how we schedule meetings. There's still been adjustments to be made. I mean, I think, my personal opinion is remote's great. There's ways it can work. But it's very hard to replicate the in-person interactions, the in from the water cooler talks, the coffee talks, the walks you guys go on. Some of those types of activities are critical for a business, and, especially an early stage business that has a lot of ideas going on. We talk about a lot of different things, and, in order to filter some of that out, those conversations are really important. So I think from a startup standpoint, there's been even more challenges to kind of address. When you deal with larger companies and, roles are much more defined, remote, can probably be scaled up a lot quicker. But I'll be honest, there's stuff that we haven't been able to try to replicate and still want to get better and still feel like it needs to be in person. But that's just our personal case. I mean, I think there is more flexibility. We try to still see each other quite a bit as a team, but we definitely do work more remotely than especially with COVID.
Can we discuss some of the tools that are necessary to make it work in remote? Is it the usual suspects with Slack, etc., or is it like Dropbox Paper and other tools that you think is foundational to get remote to work? Because some people are struggling on the software side on figuring out remote.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we've always had the software side pretty, the typical suspects, Asana, HubSpot, Slack, Discord, Whereby is one of our favorites from the video side. Those have always been the kind of usual suspects, but I think what's the improvement has been made is figuring out what the processes look like within each one of those categories. And really, staying together as a team on we're going to do it this way, because everybody works slightly differently. So it's more about figuring out which ones we want to agree on and which ones work best for us. Less on, specific, there's the one tool that just solves all our problems.
Yeah, definitely. So when you're hiring, because you're kind of in hiring mode the next years and also now, I think some of the positions are in Bergen, correct?
Correct.
So how does it look from an American to hire people in Norway? Because maybe, can we introduce Norway as a country for 1 minute before you answer that question? Because we're not like a East European country where people cost, I don't know what the salary is in East Europe, but I mean, we're a fairly rich country with, how can I say this? I have to put it in a way that doesn't get me in trouble. We enjoy, you said we enjoy our walks, so we have some freedom and we don't like to sit in the office from 8 to 8 maybe. So how does it look hiring people in Norway from your perspective?
No, again, when it comes down, it's about what's the right fit, right? Because the mission that we are going after, we want to make a big impact across oceans, and we think people in Norway have that same drive and that same passion. And it doesn't mean that we have to work the exact same way. You can be efficient and be in the office for 6 hours. You can fiddle around and get more done in 12 hours, if that's the way that you work. I think for us, it's about the right person, not necessarily, whether you fit into the right schedule and whatnot. So, that's how I'm doing it. We're looking for people that are the right fit and have the right drive and have the right passions. How we, culturally match up, or, the differences, we know we're going to need to work through some of them. But that's something that I feel like we can figure out.
But can you tap into, you must have some funny Norwegian stories, because I don't think you knew a lot about Norway when you came to Norway. Can you just explain for maybe the foreign listeners, how did you found Norway? Do you have any stories that you remember that okay, I'm in Norway now, not in US?
I think Bergen has its own unique culture and style. The one story I have is, whenever we first got there, what people said was, if it's sunny outside, do not expect anybody in the office. And, coming from business, from big cities, what does that mean? Doesn't work has to get done. Business is business. If there's a call there's a call, right? That's just what happens. You may have your cell phone, but you got to be on it. What I've come to learn is, when the sun is out in Bergen, everybody will be outside. That is a hard and fast rule that, took time. But I mean, I'll say it, it makes a lot of sense. Living in Bergen for a few months, when you see that sun comes out, that is the kind of call sign.
Yeah, because you have to explain a typical day in Bergen, right? Yeah, you have to explain a typical day in Bergen, because it's not sunny all the time.
Exactly. No, it's when those days are out, work gets adjusted, everything gets adjusted to make sure you can fit it in. But I absolutely love it.
Yeah, because I think Bergen is one of the cities with the most amount of rainy days. So I think that's an important part of that story. So
that's true. Yeah. And I'm not sure, maybe Seattle works in a similar way, because I know there's definitely a lot of rain there. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the small quirks for sure.
So last question, Tony, before we hang up, if you can forecast your company maybe 2 years forward and then 5 years forward, what are the milestones you would like to see, just that people can understand what you want to accomplish going forward the next years?
Yeah, I mean, I think within the next year and a half, our focus is going to be continuously Norway. Our goal is to build, what's valuable for the farmers and really putting them first. I think as you grow from there, when you forecast outside of 3-5 years, it's about how this data and, what the farmers are doing can help grow the industry. How does it help it scale better? How does it help it scale in a sustainable way? And how do we bring these tools to the larger markets? Whether it's, the growing seaweed and kelp markets, or filter feeders or shrimp markets, but how do you scale what's going on in Norway into, these other markets? But that's what we look at when you're looking at 2 to 5 years.
So in 5 years, then we're talking emerging markets, because this is a global company. It's not like you're going to end in Norway, right?
Yeah, we definitely hope to keep expanding. And that is definitely the plan, is to keep looking at other markets.
Perfect. So for people interested in maybe having an interesting job, this could be, it's different joining a company in a year. I don't know what year that is. Is it third, 40 year?
2.
Yeah, 2.
Yeah, it's about 2.5.
Because now you're getting to be a part of scaling. I mean, the first 2 years is a lot of trying and failing, I guess.
Yeah. I think the first 2 years, it can seem hectic, right? You don't know where things are going. There's a lot of pivots going on, a lot of new ideas, but at this stage, it's really about growth and scaling up what's going on to impact more and help our farmers for sure.
Perfect ending. Thank you so much, Tony, for taking the time. It was awesome.
Thank you. This has been great.
Hi everyone, Christopher here again. Just a few things before you leave the show. If you like this episode, it would be great if you could give it a review and also share it with your professional network. If you want to get in touch with me, Twitter is the place. Just go to @Chris Vonheim. You can also find this information in the show notes. Hope to see you tune in to the next episode, and take care.